الحمد لله رب العالمين. الحمد لله ذي الملك والملكوت ذي العزة والجبروت. الحمد لله حي قيوم لا ينام، عزيز لا يضام، قهار لا يرام. وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له، وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما. يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله حق تقاته ولا تموتن إلا وأنتم مسلمون. We who believe fear Allah as He should be feared and die not except on the state of Islam. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the most merciful, bestow upon us the gift to die on the state of Islam. Allahumma ameen ya Rabbil Alameen. Amma ba'd. In a hadith Qudusi narrated by the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam on behalf of his Lord, in which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that the salah has been, divided in two halves. A half for Allah and half for the servant. And the description of the hadith is in reality the Surah Al-Fatiha. So what the believer or the servant of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would say, Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala responds, Hamadani Abdi. My servant is being thankful and hamidun to me. Then he say, Ar-Rahman Ar-Rahim. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala say, Athna alayya abdi. He's praising me. When he says, Maliki yawmuddin, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala answer, the one who's worshipping. And he say, Qala majjadani aw azzamani abdi. My servant is glorifying me. When he says, Iyyaka na'budu wa iyyaka nasta'in. Only you, Ya Allah, we worship. Only you, Ya Allah, we ask for help. The hadith says that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala here says, this is between me and you. And for you, what you have asked, what you have beseeched, what you have invoked. And the dua comes, the remaining of Surah Al-Fatiha, Ihdina as-Sirat al-Mustaqima, to the end of the surah. Now, the key of the whole surah, the key of the worship is Iyyaka na'budu wa iyyaka nasta'in. Only you, Ya Allah, is worship, is clearing yourself from any associating partner with Allah. Wa iyyaka nasta'in is clearing oneself from the hawl and quwwah, that you have any power or anything except by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala leave and help. So you are acquiring the help of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to worship Him, to be away from the haram, and to be acting in a way of righteousness, in the way that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has commanded us and the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam has instructed us. Therefore, in this Iyyaka na'budu wa iyyaka nasta'in is the key of the ikhlas, is the key of the sincerity to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, upon which is based the way Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will deal with you. So the more sincere you are in Iyyaka na'budu wa iyyaka nasta'in, the more Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will be with you to fulfill for you the guidance that you are asked, and Allah taught you to ask Him, Ihdina as-Sirat al-Mustaqim. The less sincerity, the more trouble and difficulty someone will have in their life. Therefore, everyone's path is defined by the sincerity they witness, they express, they truly have in Iyyaka na'budu wa iyyaka nasta'in. And based on it, everyone's path is different. Inna sa'yakum la shatta. Is diverse your path. Is your way is all diverse. It depends. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said in the other ayah, قَالَ كُلٌّ يَعْمَلَ وَلَا شَاكِلَتِهِ. Everybody is working upon their own shakila, their own way, their own way. وَرَبُّكُمْ أَعْلَمُ بِمَنْ هُوَ هَدَى سَبِيلًا. And your Lord, He knows who's the one or those among you are the most guided. And the shakila, it's a mix and interaction between one's habit, one's tradition, one's culture, and one's belief. Therefore, everyone has a shakila that's specific for them. And for this reason, your path to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to depend mainly about the key that define your worship, which is your sincerity when you're standing before Allah and saying, Iyyaka na'budu wa iyyaka nasta'in. The more neglectful we are to إِيَّاكَ نَعْبُدُ وَإِيَّاكَ نَسْتَعِينُ, the farther we are from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now, this is not between you and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that is an absolute and in abstract way, but it really comes how to interact and has in its impact in your path of your life. Because every human being among us has two paths. A path that he or she chooses, that's maslakun mukhayyar, and a path that is distant, that is governed and ruled by the destiny of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The one that we have the full choice, the free will in it, is your desire, your motivation, your aspiration, your dreams, whatever you want. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, do whatever you will. إِنَّهُ بِمَا تَعْمَلُونَ بَصِيرٌ. He is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, all seeing everything you do. Al-Muqaddaru, the one that distant, the one the decree of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that He put subhanahu wa ta'ala laws that interact with our choices to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, either to help you. These choices that you make, they will be confronted, they will be subhanallah interacting with what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has decreed from laws. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is either to help you, facilitate for you the path to the guidance, or someone to be diverted and to be wal'iyadu billah led astray. It all depends on your choice, and then in the interaction of your choice with the sunnah, with what Allah has decreed. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, قَالَ فَمَنْ أَعْطَى وَاتَّقَى, whoever spend in the sake of Allah and show piety and believe in the hereafter, which is the husna, the paradise, فَسَنُيَسِّرُهُ, will facilitate his way to the al-yusra, to make it easy for them. And on the other way, the opposite way, the one who's being stingy and who was like denying and rejecting and belying the way of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, is going to be make easy for them the path of evil, wal-iyadu billah. So, having these two paths in our life, which is the path that you choose, but this path that you choose is going to be interacted and confronted with what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has defined, has decreed for us. Every step you do in your life is going to open for you a key or a door to a destiny that you design yourself, but by interacting with the law of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, either you find yourself far from Allah or closer to Him, that He will take care of you subhanahu wa ta'ala. In Surah Al-Isra, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala defined for us these two paths in a very simple way. قَالَ مَنْ كَانَ يُرِيدُ الْعَاجِلَةِ, whoever who's wishing and having and wanting and struggling for this hasty life, al-ajila, so short, عَجَّلْنَا لَهُ, will hasten for him whatever he desires, but not all of them, for just few of them. لِمَنْ نَشَاءُ لِمَنْ نُرِيدُ. Then all of them, because there's people, they dream to be like those who are indulging into their pleasure and watching and following them. And those who are indulging in their pleasure, they're both in the same subhanallah sin. And they're going to be wal'iyadu billah cast into the punishment, the chastisement of the hereafter. قَالَ ثُمَّ جَعَلْنَا لَهُ جَهَنَّمَ يَصْلَاهَا مَذْمُومًا مَدْحُورًا. You're going to be humiliated and into full perdition, wal'iyadu billah. وَمَنْ أَرَادَ الْآخِرَةِ, whoever who seek the hereafter, وَسَعَى لَهَا سَعْيَهَا, and fulfill all the requirement associated with the hereafter, which is seeking the face of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and he is a believer, therefore his sa'i is going to be mashkura. Mashkura is going to be, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is grateful to you, and He will reward you, and He will give you, and will help you, and will support you, and give you His blessing subhanahu wa ta'ala wherever you are. Therefore you have two paths. One path that you decide, but whatever you decide is going to be interacted with the Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala decree. Is either you go to someone who's going to be ruining themselves, corrupting themselves, getting themselves under the wrath of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or a person who will be the closest to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now the believers is about the disbeliever that subhanallah is being ordained, and this is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for everyone gave them the opportunity to do their struggle of their existence the way they wish and the way they desire and the way they choose. But for the believer, we have only one thing, is that you're seeking the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So this is a fact. This is everyone believer, he had that in their heart. However, whatever motivation we have, whatever immersion we have in this worldly life is subhanallah diverse. There's people that are very close to the dunya. They are very into this worldly life. They are into indulging their pleasure. But that does not prevent them from the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. However, the more someone is into the dunya, the more difficulties that they will be facing into their life. Why? Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, as you have set your intention, which is what define your path, what define your trajectory, you have set it to be Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You said, I want the akhirah, ya Allah. Then you are indulging yourself into this pleasure of the dunya. Then you're going to be following or subhanAllah be struck by many of the difficulties. Why? Because Allah intending based on your intention to cleanse you, to purify you, to get you close to Him subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now, regardless of how much you are doing from this dunya, the believer, he has to have that yaqeen. That yaqeen, certainty that whatever difficulty is befalling on you or upon you is to help you get close to Allah. But the problem, if you continue in this path, we might fail into many of the difficulties. We might turn away from the path of Allah. We might get tired, and you will have as associate or as an alliance or an ally in the shaitan. Therefore, we turn away from the deen. So that's what threat many of us. Many of us. However, there is a way, because in the world that we live today, you cannot limit or restrict, or you say, is this something that I'm doing, that I'm enjoying from the pleasure of the dunya is going to lead me to the wrath of Allah? It's really difficult, especially that we live in a materialistic world, what subhanAllah, consumerism is what governing the whole hearts of the people. It's a fact. It's a reality. Now, what is the path to hold on the path of Allah? What is the way to really secure our path with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? To stay with Him with that sincerity of إِيَّاكَ نَعْبُدُ وَإِيَّاكَ نَسْتَعِينُ, seeking truly the pleasure of Allah. Despite the fact that we might not be really true good people. I mean, when I say good people, we mean like we are not pure, righteous people, always like praying all the time and everything, and we're doing everything, you know, into the way of the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. And that's the key here. What is the path? So the path, really, dear brother, respected sister, there is a shortcut. Of course, a shortcut needs struggle. This way is to have one of your character, noble character that you have, that you're dear to your heart, and you know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala loves such a character. To make it to be effective in your life, to be the guide into your life, to be the one who's enveloping your life and guiding it, and subhanAllah correcting your trajectory every time that you find yourself slipping away from the path. Before I come into this very characteristic that will help us to guide our life, despite the fact that we have a lot of desire in this dunya, that many of us indulging into a lot of the gain of this dunya, which by the way is not haram, but the way how you conceive it, the way how you treat it, the way how you regard it, the way how subhanAllah is affecting your heart and you affect your path, that is the issue is there. So there is two aspects really to help us be, you know, for a preparedness to come to this characteristic, to make it really activated in your life, to be our guide that protecting our path. This characteristic, or these two characteristics, or these two paths, the first one, because when a believer knows that these things is decreed by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and you seek in His path, and you seek in His pleasure, and you take one step, with this step is far from what it pleases Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah will send on you difficulty to bring you back. To bring you back. And that's how these two paths, how they work. And this is Allah's mercy upon us. قَالَ وَلَنَبْلُوَنَّكُمْ, we're going to test you with all these matters. We'll strike you with difficulties, with famine, with things, with losing, you know, dear people to you. All of that, subhanAllah, to help you be closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, not to hurt you. Not to put pain into your heart. The pain is normal. We are human beings, sensitive and weak, and subhanAllah, restricted and confined into the finitude that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made it to be innate in us. Now,
to be ready to activate such character, as we're going to see it and inshallah share it, first you need to have fulfill two elements. The first element is to have a sidq ma'Allah, to be truthful with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I mean by truthful here that you truly want the pleasure of Allah, that you are truthful in seeking the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. However, you are weak, many of the prayer you miss, that's fine. Sometimes you are invited to places where you should not be, you go, but you are truthful. You truly love Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this is the first, regardless of all your desire, regardless of everything that you do, if you have the truthfulness, that's what you need to fulfill first. That's the element that you need to work on. There's a man, he's in the name of Abdullah, and he used to call, his nickname Himaran. In the time of the Prophet ﷺ, and he used when he speaks, he make the Prophet ﷺ laugh. This man used to drink alcohol, and the Prophet ﷺ, he had already flogged him for this sin. And every time they bring him, the Sahaba, they will be like, hitting him with their shoes, just, as a way of correction. But one of the people in the gathering, when he left, he said, قَالَ لَعَنَهُ اللَّهُ مَا أَكْثَرُ مَا يُؤْتَ بِهِ. May Allah curse him. This person is being like, coming a lot, doing the same sin. The Prophet ﷺ, look what he said. قَالَ لَا تَلْعَنْهُ. Do not curse him. He indeed loves Allah and His Messenger. He has a characteristic. He has a good character in his heart. He loves Allah and His Messenger. You should not curse him, despite the fact he's been weak. Because in the hadith, Abdullah ibn Mas'ud, when he came to the Prophet ﷺ, he said, can a believer commit adultery? The Prophet ﷺ, yes. He said, can a believer, drink alcohol? He said, yes. When he came to the lying, he said, no, because the lying, it changed the perception, corrupt the heart. It make you look at things in different way. Therefore, you will be thinking that you are on the right path, but you are far. But subhanAllah, committing fahisha is out of the weakness of the self. Someone, when they committing, they run and flee back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, said, yes, the believer commits such a thing. And actually the muttaqi, the way how he defined it in the Quran, is those when they commit fahisha, when they wrong themselves, they remember Allah and they run back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So it's not the believer, right, to see the sinless person, but the believer who commit the sin, but he runs back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala when they do such a thing out of weakness, not opposing the law of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala or intending to violate the way of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is the first element. Having your heart, despite all what you do in this dunya, regardless, that you truly seeking the pleasure of Allah. That you truly seeking the pleasure of Allah. The second element is to change. This is in the heart. The second element is in the concept. We need to change that image that we have in our mind, that the righteous person is a person who's always in retreat, in seclusion, who wears, the worn out of clothes, the one who's far from the dunya, renounces the whole dunya, and it's like we're making the virtue is associated to weakness, is associated to misery. That's not the belief in Islam. That's actually belief in the secularism, which is when it was such an idea, such a concept all spread into their religion, which has been altered. They stood against it and they fought it. So to make subhanAllah to the point that in the Western literature, you find some, they talk the people of virtue are the people who are suffering the most. And the people of evil are the people who are the rich, are the people who govern. And this is a very wrong idea. We have that concept, someone who's like Zahid, which is like the best of the people among the believer, is someone who does not work, he's a passive, he's inactive, always making tasbih or make a salat. That's not the way of the believers. As a matter of fact, the description of the companion of the Prophet ﷺ in the previous book, قَالَ أُسُودٌ بِالنَّهَارِ رُهْبَانٌ بِاللَّيْلِ. They are like lions in the day, working, acting, building, inventing. And they are like monks in the night. That's the characteristic of the believer. Therefore, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he said, the strong believer for Allah is better and dearer to Allah than the weak believer, and in both there is good. So if you seek something, if you want something, go ahead and get it. وَاسْتَعِنْ بِاللَّهِ وَلَا تَعْجَزْ, and rely on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Ask Him for help. إِيَّاكَ أَسْتَعِينُ يَا رَبِّي. And this is the second element, a concept that a good believer, a salih, is always, it's not that person who's secluded, wearing out, renouncing to the dunya. No. He's the person who can be rich, a person who has like high level, into corporate, a person who's like, you see them engineers and doctors. Yes, they can be righteous people, because the righteous people is in the heart. It's not, subhanAllah, in the form, how you're going to be renouncing to the whole dunya, and you make yourself into misery. Why? Because you chose to be a righteous person. That's not right. That's not right. So to change this concept, which is going to open up the gate for every one of us to look forward to be righteous. Because don't think righteous people is going to hold you back from the dunya. Don't think righteous people is going to stop you from doing things that you like. In a moderate way. If you are from those, who want to game, go play the game. But you do it in a moderate way, and you'll be a righteous person. You want to, subhanAllah, build your body in a fitness. Go, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala say, this is one of the things, because you want to, subhanAllah, develop some of better healthy way, make you, subhanAllah, give you more concentration. You have a great intention. You're not doing it to show off. You see, subhanAllah, and that's how it also keep you righteous and keep you fighting in a way like competing in the way of the nearness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and not thinking that you have to desert yourself from this whole dunya and whatever people are doing out there, it's haram. That's not the way of Islam. That's not the concept of what means to be a believer righteous. Min al-muhsinin. Al-muhsinu is the one who's mindful of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Al-muhsinu is the one who perfects every action and every work they do. As Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala loves that, and the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam told us, إِذَا عَمِلَ الْمُؤْمِنُ عَمَلًا أَحَبَّ اللَّهُ أَنْ يُدْخِنَهُ. Allah loves that you perfect every work you do. Therefore, the path of ihsan is the path of excellence in the heart, in the soul, and in the action. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala didn't brought you here to be passive, secluded, in retreat, making your salah, when you're being brought here to spread the justice and the goodness and to be a good example for the people. How can you be a good example of the people when you are the people like the monks and those who, subhanAllah, in their towers or in their temples? That's not the way of the believer. This is the second element to help us have the preparedness mentally and in our heart. When it comes to the khasla and nabilatu, this character that is noble character. This noble character, if you have it in yourself, is going to protect you. Because when you're invited to a place and you think this is not yours, you're going to say, I'm sorry, I need to leave. Why? Because you have that such taqwa inside your heart, and it been manifested in certain, element. If someone, for example, have modesty and sense of shyness from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when he find himself in a place, he said, this is not me, this is not where I should be. I feel Allah is watching me. You leave, and you see that noble character help you to correct you. A noble character help you to not do things because you want to protect your honor. You don't want anyone to talk anything about your family into your back. Why? Because you did such a thing. You fear Allah, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, do not do such a thing. Therefore, that character of haya, because the one who does not have haya, modesty, they do whatever you want. But you have haya, so you only do what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala pleases. You take the story of Yusuf, if you study it, closely, and you see that he has a particular character that, subhanAllah, it was with him all his life. It's the character of ihsan, of good doing, of being close to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It was a destiny to have the trying of the wife of the Al-Aziz seducing him. And it was his ihsan and the blessing of his ihsan that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protected him. And then the whole part of those mob, in the high society for the women, to have him to submit to their desire. And it is his ihsan who helped him to be saved and he chose the prison. Allah gave him the prison, but the most important, He diverted him and He protected him from that. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, while he is in prison, he didn't become like someone who's rude, but he kept his ihsan. And the two people from his companion, when they came to him because they saw him a good person, good in heart, good in speech, good in dealing with people. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make into his hidden destiny that one of them, he's the one who going to remember him after years, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will to talk about Yusuf to get him out. And it is this ihsan that make Yusuf alayhi salam, when he leaving this prison, is to live with certainty, is with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. A year before, he still has things, because after years in the prison, he felt suffocated and he wished to leave because he's innocent. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, it's because of your ihsan you're gonna stay. You're gonna stay. It was a difficulty for Yusuf alayhi salam, but because of his connection with Allah, because of his ihsan to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allah kept him more years into the prison. And then when he came to come out, he came out and he cleared everything, that everyone know that Yusuf is the purest, that everyone know that Yusuf was on the right path. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with his ihsan elevated him to the position of the Aziz. With his ihsan he was dealing with his brother, and when he told and disclosed his identity, what he said, قال إنه من يتقي ويصبر فإن الله لا يضيع أجر المحسنين. Whoever who fear Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and show piety, Allah will not waste the action and the deeds of the good doers. And he was one of them. There you see, subhanallah, what Yusuf alayhi salam was his inner conversation to want to leave the prison, to want to do this. But when he's interacted with the destiny of Allah to help him and elevate him, Allah chose for him the best. So the best for Yusuf, it was to stay upon, almost 7 years, more 7 years in the prison. Why? Because Allah has treated him with ihsan. And you can apply these things on your life. You've been asking things and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will not give it to you. But He will give it to you after years. When you are ready, when you have that maturity to be grateful to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then you realize what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given you. And it's time to help you and facilitate for you the attainment of His pleasure subhanahu wa ta'ala. And there's many examples. Just go, through them as a reminder, an invitation for all of you to reflect on it. The truthfulness of Ibrahim alayhi salam. It was that noble character defining and guiding all his struggle in his existence. His truthfulness who helped him to stand, of course, by the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in front of the trial of the fire. It is truthfulness who helped him to stand, alayhi salam, in the trial of killing his child. His truthfulness that was with him to make him the Imam for the whole humankind, and his truthfulness that make him to be Khalilur Rahman, the friend of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Yunus alayhi salam was from those who praises Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala all the time. It was his praises that helped him to be saved from the stomach of the whale. لولا أنه كان من المسبحين. Had it not been from those who celebrate the praises of Allah, he would have stayed as being like the stomach of the whale would have been his own grave. And the sabr, the patience, it was the noble character in the life of Ayub that defined all his journey. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala praising him for that. The ikhlas, the sincerity, it was the noble character in Musa alayhi salam. إِنَّهُ كَانَ مُخْلِصًا وَكَانَ رَسُولًا نَبِيًّا. That make him to fight, to struggle, to stand strongly in front of Fir'aun, and to bear with sincerity and with patience the subhanallah, the harming that coming from his own people. And it was the sidq and the enjoyment of the good to always remind his family to pray, Ismail alayhi salam. That was the sidq of the wa'ad, of faithfulness and fulfilling his promise. All this character, they were what manifested from their taqwa to be the guide of their life. Dear brother, respected sister, Allah put in you noble characters. Look into yourself. One of you might have generosity. Activate it, make it to be the guide of your life. Allah will protect you with this character. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will help you, will correct your path, and will shower you with His blessing. But make it to be like for Ayyub the Sabr, like for Yunus the Tasbih, like for Musa the Ikhlas, like for Yusuf the Ihsan, like for Ibrahim the Siddiqiyya. You have one, all of you. You might, subhanAllah, have something dear to your heart, the prayer. Make it to be the center of all your life. Make the dua that you want into your prayer. Make everything that will help you. You might have something dear to your heart is fasting. So make out the fast. Don't kill your fasting to make it cold, to make it something that passive, to make it like you do it because like you just, entering in a diet. Not make it as a worship to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You might be something you have close to your heart that you want to volunteer and help people. Do it for the sake of Allah. It will be that noble character would define your life and your struggle and elevate you in the sight of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and protect you from the calamities. And when it hits you, any calamity, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will bestow upon you the power of patience and help you subhanahu wa ta'ala to give you the yaqeen so you endure it with the good smile in your heart. أقول قولي هذا واستغفر الله لي ولكم فاستغفروه الغفور الرحيم. بسم الله وكفى والصلاة والسلام على النبي المصطفى أما بعد. Developing and activating a noble character that you already have. It's just you look into yourself. Some of you, they have generosity. Allah gave him, subhanallah. You find people very, subhanallah, deeply into, salat and Quran and everything. But it comes to generosity, is difficult for them to give. There's people, subhanallah, they give. Almost, subhanallah, is like, they have like, subhanallah, a bank account that never come to an end. Use that generosity to really shape your life and to do it for the sake of Allah. Allah protect you. You have someone who's loving the Quran. Make that love of the Quran to be the guide into your life, the one that protects you. As I have gave you the example, every prophet has a particular, mashallah, a noble character. And even your salah, even your dua, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will help you and protect you and bring you to Him subhanahu wa ta'ala with His blessing and with His help and with His support. And when you make the dua, because you're doing it for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You're asking for the rizq. Yeah, ask, this is rahmah from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And one of the intent of the rizq, I said, yeah, Allah, if I don't have rizq, I will lose focus. I cannot even concentrate in the salah. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give you rizq to help you concentrate in the salah. So there is even a technique of the dua, how you can ask everything in the dunya that everybody loves, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give it to you because you did it in the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And Allah will give you right away. As He did for Musa. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent him to Fir'aun, He said, قَالَ رَبِّ اشْرَحْ لِي صَدْرِي وَيَسِّرْ لِي أَمْرِي. A long dua to expand and uplift his heart and to have, Haruna to help him and good thing. قال, what is the purpose? كَيْ نُسَبِّحَكَ كَثِيرًا وَنَذْكُرَكَ كَثِيرًا. To glorify you and remember you, Ya Allah, much. And to be in remembrance of you much. What Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, قَالَ لَقَدْ أُوتِيتَ سُؤْلَكَ يَا مُوسَى. You have been given what you have asked. For all of you, Allah is not saying it especially for Musa, for all of us. If you make your dua with one intent, to be closer to Allah, with tasbih and with dhikr, in whatever thing in the dunya that you love, and Allah make it halal for us. فنسأل الله سبحانه وتعالى أن يثبتنا على الصراط المستقيم. اللهم اغفر لنا ذنوبنا أجمعين. اللهم ارزقنا بالخصال النبيلة يا أرحم الراحمين. ونمها في قلوبنا واجعلها تفضي على سلوكنا يا كريم يا رحمن يا رحيم. اللهم ارحم إخواننا في غزة. اللهم ارحم إخواننا في غزة وفلسطين والشام والسودان. اللهم أفرغ عليهم صبرا. اللهم ارفع عنهم الهم والغم. اللهم سد جوعتهم. اللهم آمن روعاتهم. اللهم آمن روعاتهم واستر عوراتهم. اللهم سدد رميتهم وانصرهم على المعتدين الظالمين. اللهم دمر الظالمين المعتدين. إنك على كل شيء قدير وبالإجابة جدير. نعم المولى ونعم النصير. وآخر دعوانا أن الحمد لله رب العالمين. وأقم الصلاة يرحمكم الله.